Hi, it's Mrs. Powers again, and we're continuing our book, The Tale of Despereaux, with book the 4th, Recalled to the Light, and chapter 34, Kill 'em Even If They's Already Dead. So that is related to the last chapter, actually, and we met the character Meggery Sow, and we saw what an unfortunate life that she's had. Her father gave her up, and then she was owned by a very mean person, and then finally a soldier saved her and took her to the castle. Now she has met Chiaroscuro, our rat that wants revenge, and he's started to talk to her, and now he knows what she wants more than anything. So she's becoming part of his plan to seek revenge on the Princess P. So, knowing all that, we begin with book the 4th, chapter 34. Reader, you did not forget about our small mouse, did you? Back to the light. That was what Gregory whispered to him when he wrapped Despereaux in his napkin and placed him on the tray. And then Mig, after her conversation with Roscuro, carried the tray into the kitchen, and when she saw Cook, she shouted, "It's me, Meggery Sow, back from the deep downs." "Ah, lovely," said Cook, "and ain't we all relieved?" Mig put the tray on the counter. "Here, here," said Cook, "your duties ain't done. You must clear it." "How's that?" shouted Mig. "You must clear the tray," shouted Cook. She reached over and took hold of the napkin and gave it a good shake, and Despereaux tumbled out of the napkin and landed right plop in a measuring cup full of oil. "Ach!" said Cook. "A mouse in my kitchen, in my cooking oil, in my measuring cup. You, Mig, kill him directly." Mig bent her head and looked at the mouse slowly sinking to the bottom of the glass cup. "Poor little Missy," she said, and she stuck her hand into the oil and pulled him out by his tail. Despereaux, gasping and coughing and blinking at the bright light, could have wept with joy at his rescue. But he was not given time to cry. "Kill him!" shouted Cook. "Goor," said Mig. "All right." Holding Despereaux by the tail, she went to get the kitchen knife. But the mouse tail, covered as it was in oil, was slick and difficult to hold on to, and Mig, in reaching for the knife, loosened her grip, and Despereaux fell to the floor. Mig looked down at the little bundle of brown fur. "Goor," she said, "that killed him for sure." "Kill him, even if he's already dead," shouted Cook. "That's my philosophy with mice. If they're alive, kill them. If they're dead, kill them. That way you can be certain of having yourself a dead mouse, which is the only kind of mouse to have." "That's some good sophy, that is. Kill them, even if they's already dead." "Hurry, you cauliflower-eared fool!" shouted Cook. "Hurry!" Despereaux lifted his head from the floor. The afternoon sun was shining through the large kitchen window. He had time to think how miraculous the light was, and then it disappeared and Mig's face loomed into view. She studied him, breathing through her mouth. "Little Missy," she said, "ain't you going to skedaddle?" Despereaux looked for a long moment into Mig's small, concerned eyes, and then there came a blinding flash and the sound of metal moving through air as Mig brought the kitchen knife down, down, down. Despereaux felt a very intense pain in his hind quarters. What do you think happened? He leapt up and into action. Reader, he scurried. He scurried like a professional mouse. He zigged to the left. He zigged to the right. "Goor," shouted Mig. "Missed them." "Ain't that a surprise?" said Cook, just as Despereaux scurried under a crack in the pantry door. "I got the little Missy's tail, though," said Mig. She bent over and picked up Despereaux's tail and held it up, proudly displaying it to Cook. "So," shouted Cook, "what good will that do us when the rest of 'em has disappeared into the pantry?" "I don't know," said Mig, and she braced herself as Cook advanced upon her, intending to give her a good clout to the ear. "I don't know." And there's the knife coming down, and there's his tail. Despereaux's. Chapter 35, The Knight in Shining Armor. Despereaux was pondering the reverse of that question. He was wondering not what he would do with his tail, but what he would do without it. He was sitting on a bag of flour high atop a shelf in the pantry, crying for what he had lost. The pain in his hindquarters was intense, and he wept because of it. But he also cried because he was happy. He was out of the dungeon. He had been recalled to life. His rescue had happened just in time for him to save the Princess Pea from the terrible fate that the rat had planned for her. So Despereaux wept with joy, and with pain, and with gratitude. He wept with exhaustion, and despair, and hope. He wept with all the emotions a young small mouse who had been sent to his death, and then been delivered from it in time to save his beloved can feel. Reader, the mouse wept. And then he lay down on the sack of flour and slept. Outside the castle the sun set, and the stars came out one by one, and then they disappeared and gave way to the rising sun, and still Despereaux slept. And while he slept he dreamt. He dreamt of the stained glass windows and the dark of the dungeon. In Despereaux's dream the light came to life, brilliant and glorious, in the shape of a knight swinging a sword. The knight fought the dark. And the dark took many shapes. First the dark was his mother, uttering phrases in French, and then the dark became his father, beating the drum. The dark was Furlough, wearing a black hood and shaking his head no, and the dark became a huge rat, smiling a smile that was evil and sharp. "The dark," Despereaux cried, turning his head to the left. "The light," he murmured, turning his head to the right. He called out to the knight. He shouted, "Who are you? Will you save me?" But the knight did not answer him. "Tell me who you are," Despereaux shouted. The knight stopped swinging his sword. He looked at Despereaux. "You know me," he said. "No," said Despereaux, "I don't." "You do," said the knight. He slowly took the armor off his head and revealed nothing. No one. The suit of armor was empty. "No, oh no," said Despereaux. "There is no knight in shining armor. It's all just make-believe, like happily ever after." And in his sleep, reader, the small mouse began to cry. Chapter 36. What Mig Carried. And while the mouse slept, Roscuro put his terrible plan into effect. Would you like to hear, reader, how it all unfolded? The story is not a pretty one. There is violence in it, and cruelty, but stories that are not pretty have a certain value too, I suppose. Everything, as you well know, having lived in this world long enough to have figured out a thing or two for yourself, cannot always be sweetness and light. Listen, this is how it happened. First, the rat finished, once and for all, the job he had started long ago. He chewed through Gregory's rope, all the way through it, so that the jailer became lost in the maze of the dungeon. Late at night, when the castle was dark, the serving girl, Miggery Sow, climbed the stairs to the princess's room. In her hand she carried a candle, and in the pockets of her apron were two very ominous things. In the right pocket, hidden in case they should encounter anyone on the stairs, was a rat with a spoon on his head and a cloak of red around his shoulders. In the left pocket was a kitchen knife, the same knife that Miggery Sow had used to cut off the tail of a certain mouse. These were the things, a rat and a knife and a candle, that Mig carried with her as she climbed up, up, up the stairs. "Cool," she shouted to the rat. "It's dark, ain't it?" "Yes, yes," whispered Roscuro from her pocket. "It is quite dark, my dear." "When I'm princess," began Mig. "Shh," said Roscuro. "May I suggest that you keep your glorious plans for the future to yourself? And may I further suggest that you keep your voice down to a whisper? We are, after all, on a covert mission. Do you know how to whisper, my dear?" "I do," shouted Mig. "Then please," said Roscuro, "please institute this knowledge immediately." "Gore," whispered Mig. "All right." "Thank you," said Roscuro. "Do I need to review with you again our plan of action?" "I get it all straight here in my head," whispered Mig, and she tapped the side of her head with one finger. "How comforting," said Roscuro. "Perhaps, my dear, we should go over it again. One more time, just to be sure." "Well," said Mig, "we go into the princess's room, and she will be sleeping and snoozing and snoring, and I will wake her up and show her the knife and say, 'If you does not want to get hurt, princess, you must come with me.'" "And you will not hurt her," said Roscuro. "No, I won't, because I want her to live so that she can be my lady-in-waiting when I become the princess." "Exactly," said Roscuro. That will be her divine comeuppance. Ooh, whispered Meg. Yes, her divine comeuppance. Meg had, of course, no idea what the phrase divine comeuppance meant, but she very much liked the sound of it, and she repeated it over and over to herself until Roscuro said, And then, continued Meg, I tells her to get out of her princess bed and come with me on a little journey. Ha, said Roscuro. A little journey, that is right. Ha, I love the understatement of that phrase. A little journey. Oh, it'll be a little journey, and indeed it will. And then, said Meg, who was now coming to her favourite part of the plan, we take her to the deep downs, and we gives her some long lessons in how to be a serving girl, and we gives me some short lessons in how to be a princess, and when we is all done studying up, we switch places. I gets to be the princess, and she gets to be the maid. Gore! Reader, this is the very plan that Roscuro presented to Meg when he first met her. It was, of course, a ridiculous plan. No one would ever, not for one blind minute, mistake Meg for the princess, or the princess for Meg. But Miggery Sow, as I pointed out to you before, was not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And reader, too, she wanted to desperately to become a princess. She wanted, oh, how she wanted. And it was because of this terrible wanting that she was able to believe in Roscuro's plan with every ounce of her heart. The rat's real plan was, in a way, more simple and more terrible. He intended to take the princess to the deepest, darkest part of the dungeon. He intended to have Meg put chains on the princess's hands and her feet, and he intended to keep the glittering, glowing, laughing princess there in the dark forever. Will he be successful in his plan? Chapter 37, A Small Taste. She was asleep and dreaming of her mother, the queen, who was holding out a spoon to her and saying, Taste this, my sweet pea, taste this, my darling, and tell me what you think. The princess leaned forward and sipped some soup from the spoon her mother held out to her. Oh, mamma, she said, it's wonderful. It's the best soup I have ever eaten. Yes, said the queen, it is wonderful, isn't it? May I have some more? Said the pea. I gave you a small taste that you would not forget, said her mother. I gave you a small taste so that you would remember. I want more. But as soon as the princess said this, her mother was gone. She disappeared, and the bowl and the soup spoon disappeared along with her. Lost things, said the pea. More lost things. And then she heard her name. She turned, happy, thinking that her mother had come back. But the voice was not her mother's. The voice belonged to somebody else, and it was coming from some place far away, and it was telling her to wake up, wake up. The pea opened her eyes and saw Miggery Sow standing over her bed, a knife in one hand and a candle in the other. Mig, she said. Gore, said Mig softly. Say it, commanded Roscuro. Mig closed her eyes and shouted her piece. If you does not want to get hurt, princess, you must come with me. Whatever for? Said the princess in an annoyed tone. As I have noted before, the princess was not a person who was used to being told what to do. What are you talking about? Meg opened her eyes and shouted, You got to come with me so after we take some lessons, you some long lessons and me some short ones, together way down in the deep downs. I can be you and you can be me. No, shouted Roscuro from Meg's pocket. No, you're doing it wrong. Who said that? Your Highness, said Roscuro, and he crawled out of Meg's pocket and made his way up to her shoulder and situated himself there, laying his tail across her neck to balance himself. Your Highness, he said again, and he raised the spoon slowly off his head and smiled, displaying his mouth full of truly hideous teeth. I think it would be best if you do as Miggery Sow suggests. She is, as you can quite clearly see, in possession of a knife, a large knife, and she will, if pushed, use it. This is ridiculous, the princess said. You can't threaten me. I'm a princess. We, said Roscuro, are all too aware of the fact of what you are. A knife, however, cares nothing for the fact that you are royalty, and you will bleed, I assume, just like any other human. The pea looked at Meg. Meg smiled. The knife glinted in the light of the candle. Meg, she said, her voice shaking the tiniest bit. I really do not think, said Roscuro, that Meg would need much persuasion to use that knife, princess. She is a dangerous individual, easily led. But we are friends, said the pea. Aren't we, Meg? Eh? Said Meg. Trust me, said Roscudo. You are not friends, and I think it would be best if you addressed all your communications to me, Princess. I am the one in charge here. Look at me. The pea looked right directly at the rat and at the spoon on his head. Her heart skipped one beat and then two. Do you know me, Princess? No, she said, lowering her head. I don't know you. But, reader, she did know him. He was the rat who had fallen in her mother's soup, and he was wearing her dead mother's spoon on his head. The princess kept her head down. She concentrated on containing the rage that was leaping up inside her. Look again, Princess, or can you not bear to look? Does it pain your royal sensibilities to let your eyes rest on a rat? I don't know you, she said, and I'm not afraid to look at you. The pea raised her head slowly. Her eyes were defiant. She stared at the rat. Very well, said Roscudo. Have it your way. You do not know me. Nonetheless, you must do as I say, as my friend here has a knife. So get out of bed, Princess. We are going on a little journey. I would like it if you dress in your loveliest gown, the one that you were wearing at a banquet not so long ago. There's a picture of her in bed with Miggery Sow over her with the rat on her shoulder. And put on your crown, said Mig. Put that on your prince's head. Yes, said Roscudo. Please, Princess, do not forget your crown. The pea, still staring at Roscudo, pushed the covers back and got out of bed. Move quickly, said Roscudo. We must take our little journey while it is still dark, and while the rest of the castle sleeps on. Ignorant. Oh, so ignorant. I am afraid of your fate. The princess took a gown from her closet. Yeah, said Roscudo to himself. That is the one. The very one. Look at how it sparkles in the light. Lovely. I will need someone to do my buttons, said the princess as she stepped into the dress. Meg, you must help me. Little princess, said Roscudo, do you think that you can outsmart a rat? Our dear Miggery Sow will not lay down a knife, not even for a moment. Will you, Miggery Sow? Because that might ruin your chances of becoming a princess, isn't that right? Gore, said Mig, that's right. And so while Mig held the knife pointed in the direction of the princess, the pea sat and let the rat crawl over her back, doing her buttons up for her one by one. The princess held very still. The only movement she allowed herself was this. She licked her lips, over and over again, because she thought that she could taste there the sweet saltiness of the soup that her mother had fed her in her dream. I have not forgotten, Mamma, she whispered. I have not forgotten you. I have not forgotten soup. Chapter 38. To the Dungeon. The strange threesome made their way down the golden stairs of the castle. The princess and Mig walked side by side, and Roscudo held himself again in the pocket of Mig's apron, and Mig pointed the sharp tip of the knife at the princess's back, and together they went down, down, down. The princess was led to her fate as around her everyone slept. The king slept in his giant bed with his crown on his head, and his hands crossed on his chest, dreaming that his wife the queen was a bird with green and gold feathers who called his name, Philip, 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 without ceasing. That means without stopping. Cook slept in a too-small bed off the kitchen, dreaming of a recipe for soup that she could not find. Where did I put that? She mumbled in her sleep. Where did that recipe go? It was for the queen's favourite soup. I must find it. And not far from Cook, in the pantry, atop a bag of flour, slept the mouse Despereaux, dreaming, as you know, reader, of knights in shining armour, of darkness and of light. And in the whole of the dark and sleeping castle, there was only the light of the candle in the hand of Miggery Sow. The candle shone on the princess's dress and made it sparkle, and the princess walked tall in the light and tried not to be afraid. In this story, reader, we have talked about the heart of the mouse, and the heart of the rat, and the heart of the serving girl, Miggery Sow. But we have not talked about the heart of the princess. Like most hearts, it was complicated, shaded with dark and dappled with light. The dark things in the princess's heart were these: a very small, very hot, burning coal of hatred for the rat who was responsible for her mother's death. And the other darkness was a tremendous sorrow, a deep sadness that her mother was dead, and that the princess could now only talk to her in her dreams. And what of the light in the princess's heart? Reader, I am pleased to tell you that the pea was a kind person, and perhaps more important, she was empathetic. Do you know what it means to be empathetic? I will tell you. It means that when you are being forcibly taken to a dungeon, when you have a large knife pointed at your back, when you are trying to be brave, you are able still to think for a moment of the person who is holding the knife. You are able to think, "Oh, poor Meg, she wants to be a princess so badly, and she thinks that this is the way. Poor, poor Meg. What must it be like to want something that desperately?" That, reader, is empathy. And now you have a small map of the princess's heart. Hatred, sorrow, kindness, empathy. The heart that she carried inside her as she went down the golden stairs and through the kitchen, and finally, just as the sky outside the castle began to lighten, down into the dark of the dungeon with the rat and the serving girl. His plan is in action. I mean, he's following through with it so far. We'll see what happens. And Despereaux is just sleeping. Chapter 39, Missing. The sun rose and shed light on what Roscuro and Miggery-Sow had done, and finally Despereaux awoke. But alas, he awoke too late. "I haven't seen her," Louise was shouting, "and I tell you, I wash my hands of her. If she's missing, I say good riddance to bad rubbish." Despereaux sat up. He looked behind him. Oh, his tail! Gone! Given over to the knife, and where the tail should be, nothing but a bloody stub. "And more foul play! Gregory dead!" shouted Cook. "Poor old man, that rope of his broken by who knows what, and him lost in the dark and frightened to death because of it. It's too much." "Oh no," whispered Despereaux. "Oh no, Gregory is dead." The mouse got to his feet and began the long climb down from the shelf. Once he was on the floor, he stuck his head around the door of the pantry and saw Cook, standing in the center of the kitchen, wringing her fat hands. Beside her stood a tall woman, jangling a ring of keys. And if you're wringing your hands, it means like you're twisting your hands like this, like people do when they're kind of nervous. Okay. "That's right," said Louise. "All the king's men was down there searching for her in the dungeon, and when they come back up, who do they have with them? They have the old man, dead. And now you tell me that Meg is missing, and I say, who cares?" Despereaux made a small noise of despair. He had slept too long. The rat had already acted. The princess was gone. "What kind of world is it, Miss Louise, where princesses are taken from right under our noses, and queens drop dead, and we cannot even take comfort in soup?" And with this, Cook started to cry. "Shh!" said Louise. "I beg you, do not say that word." "Soup!" shouted Cook. "I will say it. No one can stop me. Soup, soup, soup." And then she began to cry in earnest, wailing and sobbing. "There," said Louise. She put a hand out to touch Cook, and Cook slapped it away. "It will be all right," said Louise. Cook brought the hem of her apron up to wipe at her tears. "It won't," she said. "It won't be all right ever again. They've taken our little darling away. There ain't nothing left to live for without the princess." Despereaux was amazed to have exactly what was in his heart spoken aloud by such a ferocious mouse-hating woman as Cook. Louise again reached out to touch Cook, and this time Cook allowed her to put an arm round her shoulder. "What will we do? What will we do?" wailed Cook, and Louise said, "Shh, there." Alas, there was no one to comfort Despereaux, and there was no time anyway for him to cry. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the king. For having heard Roscuro's plan, reader, Despereaux knew that the princess was hidden in the dungeon. And being somewhat smarter than Miggery-Sow, he sensed the terrible unspoken truth behind Roscuro's words. He knew that Meg could never be a princess, and he knew that the rat, once he captured the pea, would never let her go. And so the small mouse, who had been dipped in oil, covered in flour, and relieved of his tail, slipped out of the pantry and past the weeping ladies. He went to find the king. Chapter 40, Forgiveness. He went first to the throne room, but the king was not there, and so Despereaux slipped through a hole in the molding and was making his way to the princess's room when he came upon the mouse council, 13 mice and one most very honored head mouse sitting around their piece of wood debating important mouse matters. Despereaux stopped and stood very still. "Fellow honored mice," said the most very honored head mouse, and he looked up from the makeshift table and saw Despereaux. "Despereaux," he whispered. The other mice of the council leaned forward, straining to make some sense of the word that the head mouse had just uttered. "Pardon?" one said. "Excuse me?" said another. "I didn't hear right," said a third. "I thought you said Despereaux." The head mouse gathered himself. He tried speaking again. "Fellow members," he said, "a ghost! A ghost!" And he raised a shaking paw and pointed it at Despereaux. The other mice turned and looked, and there was Despereaux Tilling, covered in flour, looking back at them, the telltale red thread still around his neck, like a thin trail of blood. "Despereaux," said Lester's son, "you've come back." Despereaux looked at his father and saw an old mouse, whose fur was shot through with gray. How could that be? Despereaux had been gone only a few days, but his father seemed to have aged many years in his absence. "Son, ghost of my son," said Lester, his whiskers trembling, "I dream about you every night. I dream about beating the drum that sent you to your death. I was wrong. What I did was wrong." "No," called the most very honored head mouse. "No." "I've destroyed it," said Lester. "I've destroyed the drum. Will you forgive me?" He clasped his front paws together and looked at his son. "No," shouted the head mouse again. "No, do not ask the ghost to forgive you, Lester. You did as you should. You did what was best for the mouse community." Lester ignored the head mouse. "Son," he said, "please." Despereaux looked at his father, at his gray-streaked fur and trembling whiskers, and his front paws clasped together in front of his heart, and he felt suddenly as if his own heart would break in two. His father looked so small, so sad. "Forgive me," said Lester again. Forgiveness, reader, is, I think, something very much like hope and love, a powerful, wonderful thing, and a ridiculous thing, too. There's the picture of Despereaux mice. Isn't it ridiculous, after all, to think that a son could forgive his father for beating the drum that sent him to his death? Isn't it ridiculous to think that a mouse could even forgive anyone for such perfidy? But still, here are the words Despereaux Tilling spoke to his father. He said, "I forgive you, Pa." And he said those words because he sensed that it was the only way to save his own heart, to stop it from breaking in two. Despereaux, reader, spoke those words to save himself. And then he turned from his father and spoke to the whole mouse council. "You were wrong," he said, "all of you. You asked me to renounce my sins. I ask you to renounce yours. You wronged me. Repent." "Never," said the head mouse. Despereaux stood before the mouse council, and he realized he was a different mouse than he had been the last time he faced them. He had been to the dungeon and back up out of it. He knew things that they would never know. What they thought of him, he realized, did not matter now, not at all. And so, without saying another word, Despereaux turned and left the room. After he was gone, the head mouse slapped his trembling paw on the table. "Mice of the council," he said, "we have been paid a visit by a ghost who has told us to repent. We will now take a vote. All in favor of saying that this visit did not occur, vote aye." And from the members of the mouse council there came a tiny but emphatic chorus of ayes. Only one mouse said nothing. That mouse was Despereaux's father. Lester Tilling had turned his head away from the other members of the mouse council. He was trying to hide his tears. He was crying, reader, because he had been forgiven. Chapter 41, The Tears of a King. Despereaux found the king in the P's room, sitting on his daughter's bed, clutching the tapestry of her life to his chest. He was weeping, although weeping really is too small a word for the activity that the king had undertaken. Tears were cascading from his eyes. A small puddle had formed at his feet. I am not exaggerating. The king, it seemed, was intent on crying himself a river. Reader, have you ever seen a king cry? When the powerful are made weak, when they are revealed to be human, to have hearts, their diminishment is nothing short of terrifying. You can be sure that Despereaux was terrified. Absolutely. But he spoke up anyway. "Sir," the mouse said to the king. But the king did not hear him. And as Despereaux watched, King Philip dropped the tapestry and took his great golden crown from his lap and used it to beat himself on the chest over and over again. The king, as I have already mentioned, had several faults. He was nearsighted. He made ridiculous, unreasonable, difficult-to-enforce laws, and much in the way of Megarry-Sao, he was not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer. But there was one extraordinary, wonderful, admirable thing about the king. He was a man who was able and willing to love with the whole of his heart. And just as he had loved the queen with the whole of his heart, so too he loved his daughter with the whole of it, even more than the whole. He loved the Princess P with every particle of his being, and she had been taken from him. But what Despereaux had come to say to the king had to be said, and so he tried again. "Excuse me," he said. He wasn't certain really how a mouse should address a king. Sir did not seem like a big enough word. Despereaux thought about it for a long moment. He cleared his throat. He spoke as loudly as he was capable of speaking. "Ahem! Excuse me, most very honored head person." King Philip stopped beating his crown against his chest. He looked around the room. "Down here, most very honored head person," said Despereaux. The king, tears still falling from his eyes, looked at the floor. He squinted. "Is that a bug speaking to me?" he asked. "No," said Despereaux. "I'm a mouse. We met before." "A mouse?" bellowed the king. "A mouse is but one step removed from a rat." "Sir," said Despereaux, "most very honored head person, please, you have to listen to me. This is important. I know where your daughter is." "You do?" said the king. He sniffed. He blew his nose on his royal cloak. "Where?" he said, and as he bent over to look more closely at Despereaux, 1 tear, 2 tears, 3 enormous king-sized tears fell with an audible plop onto Despereaux's head and rolled down his back, washing away the white of the flower and revealing his own brown fur. "Sir, most very honored head person, sir," said Despereaux, as he wiped the king's tears out of his own eyes. "She's in the dungeon." "Liar," said the king. He sat back up. "I knew it. All rodents are liars and thieves. She is not in the dungeon. My men have searched the dungeon." "But no one really knows the dungeon except the rats, sir. There are thousands of places where she could be hidden, and only the rats would know. Your men would never be able to find her if the rats did not want her found." "Ah!" said the king, and he clapped his hands over his ears. "Do not speak to me of rats and what they know," he shouted. "Rats are illegal. Rats are against the law. There are no rats in my kingdom. They do not exist." "Sir, most very honored head person, that is not true. Hundreds of rats live in the dungeon of this castle. One of them has taken your daughter, and if you will send—" The king started humming. "I can't hear you," he started to shout. "I cannot hear you, and anyway, what you say is wrong, because you are a rodent, and therefore a liar." He started to hum again, and then he stopped and said, "I have hired fortune-tellers and a magician. They are coming from a distant land. They will tell me where my beautiful daughter is. They will speak the truth. A mouse cannot speak the truth." "I am telling you the truth," said Despereaux. "I promise." But the king would not listen. He sat with his hands over his ears. He hummed loudly. Big fat tears rolled down his face and fell to the floor. Despereaux sat and stared at him in dismay. What should he do now? He put a nervous paw up to his neck and pulled at the red thread, and suddenly his dream came flooding back to him. The dark and the light and the knight swinging his sword and the terrible moment when he had realized the suit of armor was empty. And then, reader, as he stood before the king, a wonderful, amazing thought occurred to the mouse. What if the suit of armor had been empty for a reason? What if it had been empty because it was waiting for him? "You know me." That was what the knight in his dream had said. "Yes," said Despereaux out loud in wonder. "I do know you." "I can't hear you," sang the king. "I'll have to do it myself," said the mouse. "I will be the knight in shining armor. There is no other way. It has to be me." Despereaux turned. He left the weeping king. He went to find the threadmaster. So I'm interested to see what his plan is and why he wants thread. So think about that for next time. And we will begin next time with chapter 42, the rest of the thread. And it looks like we're pretty close. We might even be able to finish the book next time. I look forward to finding out what's going to happen, if Despereaux is going to be able to save the princess, and what is going to happen to the rat if the princess does get saved. I don't know. He's already an outlaw, so we'll see. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.